There's something most people learn too late. Not everyone around you is who they appear to be. They smile, they speak well, they act supportive. But something feels off. You can't explain it clearly. There's no obvious proof, just a quiet feeling that doesn't go away. I'm going to tell you something I learned from a place most people never see. I wasn't always on this side, speaking openly like this. There was a time I was deeply involved in the occult, trained to observe behavior, patterns, and how people present themselves versus who they really are underneath. And one thing became very clear: people can hide their intentions, but they cannot hide their patterns. I remember this clearly. This wasn't about dramatic evil or obvious deception. It was subtle, consistent, small things that didn't match. And most people missed it because they were looking for something obvious. Now listen carefully. This is not about fear. This is about awareness. Because the most dangerous people are not the loud ones. They are the ones who blend in, the ones who appear normal, while quietly affecting your energy, your decisions, and your direction. Now imagine this: you trust someone, you allow them into your space, you share your thoughts, your plans, your goals. But over time, things start shifting. You feel less clear, less confident, less stable, and you don't understand why. Now listen carefully. That confusion is not random. It's a signal, a sign that something is not aligned. Because when someone is genuine, their presence brings clarity. But when someone is not, their presence creates subtle disruption. I saw this again and again. People ignored small signs until the pattern became too strong to ignore. Now listen carefully. You don't need to wait for something extreme to happen. You just need to recognize the patterns early. Because in the next chapters, I'm going to reveal 7 specific signs, subtle but powerful, that show when someone is not who they seem, even if everything on the surface looks completely normal. Now, this is the first sign, and it's the one most people notice but ignore, because on the surface, everything sounds right. They say the right things, they promise support, they agree with you. But when it comes to action, something is missing. I remember this clearly. This was one of the easiest patterns to spot, yet the most commonly overlooked, because people listen to words instead of watching consistency. Now listen carefully. Anyone can say what sounds good. Anyone can appear aligned with you in conversation. But real alignment shows in behavior, not occasionally, but repeatedly. Now here's the truth you need to understand. When someone's words and actions don't match, it's not a mistake, it's a pattern. I saw this again and again. Someone would say, "I support you." But when the moment came to show it, they were absent. They would say, "I'm here for you." But when you needed clarity or consistency, they disappeared not once, but repeatedly. Now listen carefully. This is where most people make a mistake. They give more weight to what was said than to what was done. And because of that, they keep trusting the words while ignoring the pattern. Now imagine this: someone constantly agrees with you, encourages you, speaks positively around you, but their actions never reflect it. No real support, no real consistency, no real follow through. That mismatch creates confusion. Now, here's something very important: confusion is not random, it appears when something doesn't align, because your mind is trying to reconcile 2 different signals: what you hear and what you experience. Now, listen carefully. When someone is genuine, their words and actions move together. You don't have to question it, you don't have to analyze it. It's clear. But when someone is not who they seem, there is always a gap, a small disconnect that keeps repeating. Now imagine this. You stop focusing on what people say and start observing what they consistently do. That alone reveals more than anything else. Now listen carefully. If someone's words and actions don't match, don't ignore it. That is the first sign, a subtle one, but powerful. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the second sign. When someone is always around when things are going well, but becomes distant the moment things require real presence or support. Now, this is where the pattern becomes clearer because it's not about what they say, it's about when they show up. I remember this clearly. This was one of the most revealing behaviors, not loud, not obvious, but consistent. Now, listen carefully. When things are going well in your life, they are there. They respond quickly. They engage with you. They seem interested. They celebrate your wins. They stay close when everything feels easy. But the moment something shifts, the moment you need real support, something changes. Now here's what happens. They become distant, slow to respond, unavailable, not completely gone, but not present in the same way. I saw this again and again. People would mistake presence during good times as genuine connection, but real connection shows under pressure, not comfort. Now listen carefully. Anyone can be around when things are easy, when there's no demand, no weight, no responsibility. But when things require presence, attention, consistency, that's when truth is revealed. Now imagine this. You're going through something. You need clarity. You need someone steady. And the same person who was always around before is suddenly harder to reach, less engaged, less available. That shift is not random. Now here's the truth you need to understand. People show their priorities through their presence, not their words. And if someone is only present when it's convenient, but absent when it matters, that tells you everything. Now listen carefully. This is where most people hesitate. They make excuses. They're just busy. Maybe it's bad timing. And sometimes that's true. But when it becomes a pattern, it's no longer occasional, it's consistent. I saw this pattern clearly. People who were not genuine maintained connection only when it required nothing from them. But the moment effort was needed, they stepped back. Now imagine this. You stop measuring connection by good moments and start observing who remains consistent when things are not easy. That alone reveals real alignment. Now listen carefully. If someone is present in your highs, but absent in your real moments, don't ignore it. That is the second sign. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the third sign, when someone subtly shifts your focus away from your direction without you realizing it at first. Now, this is where things become even more subtle because this sign doesn't feel negative at first. It doesn't look like opposition. It doesn't sound like disagreement. In fact, it often sounds helpful. I remember this clearly. This was one of the most overlooked patterns because it didn't come with resistance, it came with redirection. Now listen carefully. You share your plans, your goals, your next steps, and instead of direct support, they begin to shift the conversation, not aggressively, but slightly. They introduce doubt. They suggest alternatives. They redirect your attention to something else. Now here's the key. It doesn't feel like they're stopping you. It feels like they're helping. But over time, your focus starts changing. I saw this again and again. People would begin with clear direction, but after repeated conversations, they became uncertain, less sure, less focused. Not because they changed their mind, but because their attention was slowly redirected. Now listen carefully. This is not about one conversation. This is about a pattern, because once might be advice, but repeated redirection is influence. Now imagine this. Every time you speak about your progress, the conversation shifts. Every time you express clarity, something is introduced that makes you rethink it. Every time you move forward, your attention is pulled somewhere else. That's not random. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Your focus is one of your most valuable assets, and anything that consistently pulls it away from your direction will slow you down, even if it feels harmless. Now, listen carefully. Genuine people may question you, but they don't repeatedly redirect you away from your path. They help you become clearer, not more confused. I saw this pattern clearly. When someone is not aligned, they don't always stop you directly. They shift you gradually, so you don't notice it happening. Now imagine this. You begin observing not just what people say, but where your focus ends up after speaking with them. That reveals everything. Now listen carefully. If someone consistently leaves you feeling less clear, less certain, or pulled away from your direction, don't ignore it. That is the third sign. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the fourth sign. When someone's presence leaves you feeling drained, even when nothing negative was said or done openly. Now, this is where the pattern becomes something you can feel, even if you can't explain it logically, because nothing obvious happens. No argument, no conflict, no clear negativity. And yet, after spending time with them, you feel different, heavier, slower, less clear. I remember this clearly. This was one of the strongest indicators, but also the most ignored, because people trust what they see more than what they feel. Now listen carefully. Your state does not change without a reason. If you feel drained after interacting with someone, something in that interaction affected you, even if it was subtle. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. Not all influence is loud. Some of it is quiet, gradual, almost unnoticeable in the moment. I saw this again and again. People would leave conversations feeling tired, but they couldn't point to anything specific. They would say, "Nothing bad happened, but I don't feel right." That's the signal. Now, listen carefully. When someone is genuine, their presence feels steady. You don't leave feeling confused. You don't leave feeling heavy. You feel clear, neutral, or even energized. But when someone is not aligned, their presence creates subtle pressure, not obvious, but consistent. Now imagine this. You spend time with someone, and afterward your thoughts feel scattered, your energy drops, your motivation decreases. Not dramatically, but noticeably. That shift is not random. Now here's something very important. This is not about blaming others. It's about observing patterns. Because if something happens once, it could be anything. But if it happens repeatedly, it's a signal. I saw this pattern clearly. People ignored how they felt and focused only on what was said. But what you feel after an interaction often reveals more than the interaction itself. Now, listen carefully. If someone consistently leaves you feeling drained, even without obvious negativity, don't ignore it. That is the fourth sign, a quiet one, but powerful. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the fifth sign. When someone keeps information from you or only shares selectively, creating gaps that slowly affect your clarity. Now, this is where the pattern becomes even more subtle, because it's not about what they say, it's about what they don't say. I remember this clearly. This was one of the most strategic behaviors, not obvious lies, not direct deception, but controlled information. Now listen carefully. You have conversations with them, and everything seems normal. They talk, they respond, they engage. But over time, you start noticing gaps. Things don't fully connect. Certain details are always missing. Certain topics are always avoided. Now, here's the key: it's not random, it's consistent. I saw this again and again. People would share just enough to appear open, but not enough to be clear. They would answer questions, but not completely. They would explain things, but leave out parts that matter. Now, listen carefully. This creates something very specific: uncertainty, because your mind tries to complete what's missing. It tries to connect the dots, but it can't, because the full picture is never there. Now imagine this: you're interacting with someone, but you never feel like you fully understand where they stand. Not clearly, not completely. There's always something slightly hidden. That feeling is not random. Now, here's the truth you need to understand: genuine people are consistent in how they communicate. They don't create unnecessary gaps. They don't make you guess. They don't leave you constantly trying to figure things out. But when someone is not who they seem, they manage what you know, carefully, quietly. I saw this pattern clearly. It wasn't about big secrets, it was about small omissions, repeated over time. Now listen carefully. When information is always partial, clarity becomes difficult, and when clarity is reduced, your decisions become weaker. That's the effect. Now imagine this: you start paying attention not just to what is said, but to what is consistently left out. That reveals more than direct statements ever will. Now listen carefully. If someone constantly shares selectively, leaving you with gaps, questions, and uncertainty, don't ignore it. That is the fifth sign. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you the sixth sign: when someone subtly competes with you instead of genuinely supporting your growth, even if they never say it openly. Now, this is the final sign, and it brings everything together, because by this point, it's no longer just one behavior, it's the overall effect they have on you. I remember this clearly. This was the clearest indicator of all. Not what they said, not what they did individually, but what remained after repeated interaction. Now listen carefully. When someone is genuine, there is clarity. You understand where you stand. You understand where they stand. You don't feel the need to constantly analyze or question everything. But when someone is not who they seem, there is confusion, not extreme, but consistent. Now here's what that looks like. You replay conversations in your mind. You question what they meant. You feel unsure about simple things. You try to figure them out. And no matter how much you think about it, you don't reach clarity. Now listen carefully. That is not overthinking. That is a signal. Because your mind is trying to resolve something that doesn't align. Now imagine this: every interaction leaves a small question, every conversation leaves a slight uncertainty, and over time, those small uncertainties build into confusion. That's the pattern. Now here's the truth you need to understand. Confusion is not something you create on your own. It appears when signals are mixed, when actions don't match words, when information is incomplete, when presence is inconsistent. Everything you've seen in the previous signs leads to this final result. I saw this again and again. People stayed in situations where they felt constantly confused, because nothing looked bad enough to question, but the confusion itself was the sign. Now listen carefully. Clarity feels stable, confusion feels unstable, and your state will always reflect which one you're in. Now imagine this: you begin to trust clarity over appearance. You stop ignoring confusion. You recognize it as a signal, not something to dismiss. That changes everything. Now, here's something very important. You don't need to confront immediately. You don't need to react emotionally. You just need to observe consistently because patterns reveal truth over time. Now, listen carefully. If someone's presence repeatedly leaves you confused, unsure, or mentally unsettled, don't ignore it. That is the seventh sign, the final one. And once you see this clearly, you no longer rely on appearances, you rely on patterns. And patterns